Most of us are certain that a child kept close and protected grows up secure, and that a child left to fend for himself grows up anxious. The Nordic families I came to know quietly proved the opposite, and it terrified me, because it meant the way I was loving my son might be the very thing making him afraid. The first time I saw a Nordic mother leave her sleeping baby outside a cafe, alone in a stroller, in the cold, while she sat inside drinking coffee, I felt something close to alarm rise in my chest. Not disapproval exactly, something older than that, something that came from the deepest part of how I was raised. Where I come from, a child is never out of an adult's reach, never left, never untended, and to see a baby placed outside in the winter air while the mother sat calmly behind glass struck me as almost a kind of abandonment. And then I watched. The baby slept. The mother was relaxed in a way I did not recognize. The other parents around her did the same thing without a flicker of worry, and slowly, uncomfortably, a question began to form in me that I could not shake for weeks. A question that eventually cracked open something I thought I understood completely, which was my own parenting and the fear I had never once noticed I was carrying. Because what I was looking at was not neglect. It was a philosophy of raising children so different from mine that it frightened me, and the fear, it turned out, had a great deal to teach me. If you have ever felt a jolt of anxiety watching another parent give their child a freedom you would never dare to give yours, and wondered for a moment whether your caution was love or whether it was something else wearing love's face, then you already understand what this video is really about, and it is not about Nordic parenting at all. It is about the invisible fears we inherit and pass on without ever choosing them. And once you see the one I was carrying, you may start to see your own, and you will not be able to unsee it, and it will change the way you watch your own hand reach out to catch a child who might not have needed catching. Let me be honest about what this is and what it isn't, because I do not want to waste the trust you gave me by clicking. I am not going to tell you that Nordic parents have it all figured out and that my culture has it all wrong, because that would be a lie and a lazy one, and this channel does not trade in the fantasy that some other culture has quietly solved the thing yours struggles with. I am also not going to tell you the reverse, that the old strict ways are best, and this permissive northern experiment is raising feral children, because that is not what I saw either. What I am going to give you is something more honest and more useful, which is the story of what happened inside me, a Chinese mother raised on closeness and protection and duty, when I collided with a way of raising children built on distance and trust and independence, and what that collision taught me about the difference between protecting a child and holding a child back. And I am describing my own family and the way I was raised, not a billion people, because Chinese families are as different from one another as any people on earth, and I have no interest in speaking for all of them. Here is the thing I saw in those Nordic families, stated as plainly as I can. From a very young age, the children were trusted to do things on their own that would have stopped my heart. Small children walked to school by themselves. They played outside, unsupervised, for hours, climbing, falling, working out their quarrels without an adult descending to solve them. They were handed real knives to whittle wood, allowed to light fires under loose watch, permitted to be cold, to be bored, to be frustrated, to struggle with a task well past the point where I would have stepped in to help. The entire culture seemed built on a single quiet assumption that ran opposite to everything in me, which was that a child is fundamentally competent, that a child left to manage difficulty will rise to it, and that the parent's job is not to shield the child from the world, but to stand back, further back than feels comfortable, and let the child discover that they can meet the world themselves. And the children I watched were not anxious or wild. They were startlingly calm, capable, self-possessed. They carried themselves like small people who already knew, in their bodies, that they could handle things. And that was the part that unsettled me most, because I wanted that for my son with a fierce and sudden longing, and I realized in the same instant that my own way of loving him might be the very thing standing between him and it. If any of that lands, if you felt the small sting of recognition, as I described it, do one thing for me before we go deeper, because it genuinely helps this reach the next parent who needs to hear it. Tell me in the comments about a moment you held your child back or were held back yourself as a child from something you could probably have handled and what you think it cost. I read these, and on this channel, those threads become something rare, a room full of people gently discovering the fears they never knew were shaping them. And if this is already stirring something, stay with me, because in a few minutes I am going to tell you the specific moment with my own son when this all became real, and I had to choose in a heartbeat between my fear and his growth, and then I will be honest with you about what the Nordic way gets wrong too, because it is not the paradise the internet sometimes sells. I make these for the person who suspects that some of what they call love might quietly be fear, and who is brave enough to want to know. So let me name the fear, because until I saw it in the mirror of another culture, I did not know it was there. I had always thought of my carefulness as pure love. When I hovered near my son at the playground, when I finished his difficult tasks for him the moment his face began to crumple, when I answered for him when a stranger asked his name, when I smoothed every obstacle from his path before he could stumble on it, I believed I was simply being a good and attentive mother, the kind I was raised by, the kind my culture honors. And a great deal of it was love, real and deep. But watching those Nordic parents sit on their hands while their children struggled, I saw with sudden clarity that woven all through my love was something else, a fear so constant and so familiar that I had mistaken it for the love itself. A fear of my child being hurt, yes, but underneath that, a fear of my child not needing me, a fear of the emptiness I would feel if he could do things without me. And underneath even that, a fear passed down through generations of my family who had lived through hard and dangerous times when a child out of reach truly could be a child lost. That fear made sense once. It kept children alive in a world that was genuinely trying to take them. But I was carrying it now, in a safe place, in a safe time, and applying it to a child who did not face those dangers. And it was no longer protecting him. It was quietly teaching him that the world is a threat and that he is not equal to it. Now watch how this connects to the exhaustion and the anxiety so many of us feel, because this is where the real insight lives. A child who is never allowed to struggle does not learn that he is capable. He learns the opposite. Every time we rush in to rescue a child from a difficulty he could have met, we send him a message far louder than our words, which is, "I do not think you can do this. Do it enough," across the childhood, and the child absorbs a quiet foundational belief that he is fragile, that the world is dangerous, that he needs someone bigger to manage it for him. And that belief does not stay in childhood. It grows up, it becomes the anxious adult who cannot make a decision without reassurance, who panics at obstacles, who was so thoroughly protected from small, manageable difficulties that he never built the inner conviction that he can handle hard things. The Nordic parents, by standing back, were not being cold. They were making a wager, the same wager underneath all of this, that the small pains of childhood struggle are not wounds to prevent, but nutrients the child needs, and that a scraped knee, a failed attempt, a cold afternoon, a quarrel worked out alone, are exactly how a human being builds the deep, unshakable knowledge that they can meet their own life. And I had been depriving my son of that nourishment in the name of love without ever knowing I was doing it. We are about a quarter of the way into what I most want to share, and if this is resonating, subscribe, because I make these for the specific person who feels that something in the modern way of raising children and the modern way of living is producing more anxiety rather than less, and who wants to understand it clearly rather than just feel it. And stay with me, because I'm about to take you into the exact moment with my son when my fear and his growth stood on opposite sides of a single small decision, and then, just as honestly, into what I believe the Nordic way gets dangerously wrong, because this channel does not sell you one culture as the answer to another. Let me take you into that moment, because the idea only becomes real when it costs something. My son, 6 years old, at a playground, standing at the bottom of a tall climbing structure that he wanted badly to climb, and that was genuinely a little beyond him. The old me would already have been there, hands up, ready to guide each foot, to hold him at every height, to make sure he could not fall. But I had been sitting with everything I had seen, and so I did something that went against every instinct in my body. I stayed on the bench, I let him look up at the thing that frightened and thrilled him, and I let him decide, and I let him begin to climb without my hands hovering an inch beneath him. And it was one of the hardest things I have ever done because every cell in me was screaming to go to him. He climbed, he got stuck halfway in a spot where the next hold was not obvious. And I watched his small face work through the fear and the problem, and I did not move, though it cost me more than I can tell you. And he found the way. He reached the top and he turned and looked for me. And the look on his face was not the look of a child who had been kept safe. It was the look of a child who had just discovered in his own body that he was capable of more than he knew. And I understood, sitting there with my heart pounding, that my staying on that bench had given him something my rushing to him never could, and that every time in the past I had climbed for him, I had quietly stolen exactly this. That is the whole tension of it, and I want you to feel the weight of it before I complicate it, because I'm about to complicate it honestly. If I had gone to him, he would have been safe, and he would have reached the top, and he would have learned nothing except that climbing is something that happens with his mother's hands beneath him. He would have been given the summit and robbed of the climb, and the climb was the entire point. The scary, wobbling, self-directed struggle up the structure was where the capability was being built, and my love, my beautiful, anxious love, had been reaching in for years to switch that struggle off, believing it was helping. This is the thing the fear hides so well. It disguises the theft as protection. It makes the stealing of a child's growth look exactly like devotion. Now let me turn the coin over because I promised I would, and here is what the Nordic way gets wrong, the part the internet almost never shows you. The way of distance and independence has a real cost, and I saw that too, and it would be dishonest to hide it. A child raised entirely on independence, on standing back, on the assumption of self-reliance, can also be a child who learns, a little too well, that he is on his own. There is a warmth in my culture, a closeness and interdependence, a sense that you belong utterly to your family and are never ever alone with your troubles, that I would not trade for all the self-reliance in the world. In the Nordic model, taken too far, I sometimes sensed a loneliness underneath the competence. A child so trained in independence that asking for help had become hard for them. A self-sufficiency that could quietly curdle into isolation, into the belief that needing others is a weakness. And that is its own kind of wound. My son will always know in his bones that he is held by a family that will never let him fall too far, and that knowledge is not the enemy of his independence. Done right, it is the very thing that makes independence safe, because a child ventures furthest when he is most sure he has somewhere to return to. The Nordic way builds the venturing. My way builds the somewhere to return to. And I have come to believe that a child needs both, and that neither culture has the whole of it. We are about halfway through, and before I give you the reframe that changed everything, I want you to answer one question honestly, just to yourself. Think about the way you parent, or the way you were parented. Are you a security-first parent, the kind who keeps the child close and safe and never far from a helping hand? Or are you a freedom-first parent, the kind who pushes the child out to face things alone and trusts them to cope? Most of us lean hard one way. Hold your answer for a moment, because here is the thing that undid the whole question for me. The opposite of overprotection is not neglect, and the opposite of closeness is not independence. The real goal is not to choose between holding your child and freeing them. It is to become the kind of parent who offers both at once, a secure base and a long leash, deep closeness and real freedom, so that the child grows up knowing both that he is capable of meeting the world alone and that he never actually has to because he belongs to people who will always be there. Fear masquerading as love keeps the child close and calls it protection. Distance without warmth sets the child free and calls it strength. But the thing a child actually needs is to be both deeply held and genuinely released, and holding those two together is the entire art. If that reframe just rearranged something for you, share this video with the one parent you know who loves their child with an anxious, hovering, exhausting love and cannot see that it might be fear, because this could be the thing that frees both of them, and it can reach them in 20 minutes instead of the years it took me. That is the whole reason a channel like this can exist. So let me get concrete about what I actually changed, because a revelation you cannot practice on an ordinary afternoon is just a feeling, and I want to leave you with something real. The first thing I changed was that I learned to notice the difference between a real danger and my own discomfort, because I had been treating them as the same thing for years. When my son reaches for something difficult, there's a flash of fear in me, and I taught myself to pause in that flash and ask a single question. Is this actually dangerous, or am I just uncomfortable watching him struggle? Almost always, it is the second. The knife might cut a small finger, but a small cut is not a catastrophe. It is a lesson. The climb might end in a fall from a low height, but a low fall is not a tragedy. It is how a body learns its own edges. Once I could separate genuine danger, which is rare and which I will always guard against, from my own anxiety, which is constant and which was running my parenting, I could finally let him do the 100 small, hard things that were building him. and step in only for the few that truly threatened him. That single distinction, danger versus my discomfort, changed more than any other thing I did. The second thing I changed was that I learned to let him finish his own struggles, to sit in the unbearable pause and not fill it. When his small hands fumbled with a task, when his face began to crumple with frustration, every trained instinct in me said, help him, do it for him, end his distress. And I learned instead to wait, to offer a word of calm rather than a rescuing hand, to let him stay in the difficulty long enough to come through it himself, because I finally understood that his frustration was not an emergency for me to solve. It was the exact feeling of a mind growing, and to interrupt it was to interrupt the growth. This is the hardest discipline of all, harder than any rule because it asks a loving parent to tolerate their child's momentary struggle for the sake of the child's lasting strength, and everything in an anxious heart rebels against it. But it is where the whole thing lives. And the third thing, the deepest, was that I kept the warmth while I loosened the grip, because I was determined not to simply trade my culture's flaw for another one. I did not want to become distant in the name of independence. So as I stepped back, I made the stepping back itself an act of warmth. I let him climb, but he knew I was there, watching, glad, on his side. I let him struggle, but he felt me believing in him through the struggle, not abandoning him to it. This is where I think my own tradition, for all the fear tangled up in it, holds something the Nordic model can miss, because I know in my bones how to make a child feel held. And the goal was never to stop holding him. It was to change what I was holding him with, from my hands, which kept him small, to my faith in him, which let him grow. A child can venture into any difficulty when he feels, underneath, the steady warmth of a parent who believes he can. That is not distance. That is the deepest closeness there is. The closeness that says, I am so sure of you that I can bear to watch you struggle, because I know what you will become. There is a deeper current under all of this that I do not want to leave unspoken, because it is the real reason this shook me so profoundly. What I was really confronting on that bench, watching my son climb, was the difference between two kinds of love and the terrible possibility that I had been giving the lesser one without knowing. There is a love that needs to be needed, that keeps the child dependent because the parent cannot bear to be unnecessary, and this love, however tender it feels, is quietly about the parent. And there is a love that aims at the child's freedom, that works patiently toward its own obsolescence, that measures its success by how little the child comes to need it. And this love, though it can feel like loss, is the higher one, because it is genuinely about the child. The Nordic parents had shown me, without meaning to, that I had been loving my son in a way that served my need to be needed, and that a braver and more generous love would aim instead at his ability to one day not need me at all. That is a hard thing for a mother to face. But once I faced it, I could not go back, because I understood that the greatest gift I could give my son was not my endless protection. It was his own competence, his own courage, his own deep knowledge that he can meet his life. And to give him that, I had to be willing to become a little more each year, unnecessary. That is the strange and painful arithmetic of raising a child. That, if you do it well, you are slowly working yourself out of a job. And the fear that made me cling was, in the end, a fear of exactly that, of the day he would not need me, which is the very day that would mean I had succeeded. So when I think back now to that Nordic mother and her sleeping baby outside the cafe, I no longer feel the alarm I felt then. I feel something closer to gratitude, because that image, so foreign and so frightening to me, was the crack through which a great deal of light got in. She was not abandoning her child. She was trusting the world and trusting her child in a way my history had never let me trust. And while I still would not do exactly as she did, and while my culture's closeness is a treasure I will never give up, she showed me the fear I had been mistaking for love. And in showing me that, she gave me the chance to love my son a little more freely, a little more bravely, a little more in the direction of his growth instead of my own need. I am still a Chinese mother. I still believe in closeness, in duty, in a family that holds you utterly. But I hold my son differently now, with hands that are ready to let go. And he is becoming someone I am not sure my fear would ever have let him become. If this video shifted something in the way you see the love between a parent and a child, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more on how the world's wisest cultures quietly build braver, freer, more capable human beings, subscribe. There's a lot more coming. See you in the next one.